Coding algorithms can be difficult, and so we need every little bit of help that we can get. Today I cover a technique that makes coding an MQL5 strategy for MT5 much quicker, simpler and more efficient. Back after this brief message. Darwinex is a UK FCA regulated broker and asset manager on a mission to disrupt the financial trading, investing and asset management industries. As a trader, you'll benefit from cost-effective market access via multiple trading platforms and APIs. These enable trading and investing in any US stock, over 60 of the most liquid futures contracts, FX and CFDs. You can even diversify your portfolio by buying and selling other traders' strategies as investable assets themselves. So, if all of that sounds interesting, learn more by clicking on the link top right now or find further links in the description right below. Now back to today's tutorial. If you code in MQL5, MetaQuotes provides a library of code specifically to make the coding of strategies quicker and easier. Today I cover an example of this for the Ichimoku indicator. So let's start with the code that I use to implement the Ichimoku crossover strategy. And in this you'll see various statements such as Ichimoku Indicator.refresh, Ichimoku Indicator.senkuspan-A. And I use these commands to get the values of each of the lines, such as the Chiku span, the Senku span A and B, and so on, in order to then process rules around those. Now, to make this simpler, I've put together a self-contained expert advisor here that does nothing else other than get the values from Ichimoku and then print them out to the screen. So let's go through this step by step to cover everything that you would need to do to use the CiIchimoku class for yourself. So the first line that is required needs to go right at the top of your expert advisor and is this include statement in order to include the Trend.mqh file. Now this is a file that's produced by MetaQuotes themselves and it includes code for numerous different indicators with an emphasis on making strategies using those indicators much more simple to code. One of those is the Ichimoku indicator, and here we're declaring a name that we will reference throughout the rest of our code as a global. So I've called it Ichimoku Indicator here, but you can call it whatever makes sense to you. Then next in your onInit function, which of course runs when you initially start your expert advisor, we're actually instantiating an instance of that class. So we're saying that Ichimoku Indicator is a new instance of this class here. Now the next section here, if you're familiar with MQL5 coding, replaces the instantiation of an indicator buffer. So we don't have a buffer here, and instead we issue a .create statement indicating the symbol, the period and the parameters of the Ichimoku indicator itself. Now, as I've said before, I've kept these at the default values throughout the whole of the analysis that we've been performing. So I've never optimized these values in any way and everything is using the default. Now in this self-contained example here, I'm just using the symbol of the current chart and the time frame period of the current chart. But obviously you could hard code different symbols here if you wanted to. Now if there's a problem creating that, we simply issue a message to the user and then return init failed from the onInit function, which stops the EA from running any further. Otherwise we issue a simple print statement to say that it's been created, return init succeeded, which means that the expert advisor is now running. The beauty of this class is how simple it now is to get the values we need. The first statement here is something you want to do on every iteration of onTick, and you're going to call the instance of the class here that we named Ichimoku Indicator, and we're invoking a method called refresh. That makes sure that the most recent values are cached ready for retrieving. So let me give you a quick example of how we retrieve them. So let's start off with Senku span A and Senku span B. And if you remember, these are the two lines that define the Ichimoku cloud, or the Kumo. And getting the values here is as simple as issuing a statement that calls the instance of the class we've declared dot Senku span A, and we pass a parameter in there for the bar number that we're interested in. So bar 0 is the most recent bar of price action. And just to show you briefly some of the other methods and properties that are available, there's a whole range of these, but I've focused on the ones here that I used as part of the strategy implementation. So just coming to a chart here, we can see the most recent price action is right here. And so getting the value of Senku span A and B from bar 0 is getting this value here and this value here. But of course the Ichimoku cloud stretches out in front of price, as we can see here. And so we might, in our rules, be interested in what the value of the Senku span A and B are at this point, which by default is 26 bars ahead of the price. And so returning to our code, that's exactly what these two lines are achieving here. So because we're ahead of price, we simply pass in a parameter of minus 26, and that gives us those most recent values. Now let's take a look at the Chiku span line, which is the yellow line that you see here. And as you'll be aware if you've watched previous episodes, by default this is plotted 26 periods behind the price. And so here, to get the most recent value of that, we invoke .ChikuSpan with a parameter of positive 26 to show that this is 26 periods behind the price. And then here I've also got the value of Tenkan Sen and Kijun Sen, again on bar 0 level with the most recent price. And then I'm taking those values and simply using the comment statement to print those out to the screen. So let's now run that. And you can see here at the top left, we're printing out those current values. So let's open the data window to make sure that they're being calculated correctly. So if we first start with bar 0, so we can hover over the most recent price bar here, we can see that Senku span A is giving a value of 143.9125, and looking over at the data window, we can see that's exactly right, and likewise for Senku span B. And then if we look at the values of the Tenkan Sen and the Kijun Sen, we can see they also match exactly. Now if we move back 26 bars to the first value of the Chiku span, we can see that we calculated that as 143.26, but that value is changing as the price action is evolving. But we can see that it's changing exactly the same in the data window. And then moving forwards 26 bars ahead of price, if we look now at the Senku span A and the most recent value, we can see that that matches, as does the Senku span B. So we know now that these are being correctly calculated. I've put this together for a single symbol, but if you have a multi-asset EA, then it's a relatively simple case of just converting this class name here to an array. And then you could have a loop at this point, which looped through each of the symbols that you were trading and created multiple instances. And this is done in a very similar way to what I've talked about previously when creating a multi-asset EA using indicator buffers. The principles are identical. Now, if you want a link to that video where I go through that in detail, I'll put that in the video description below. If there are any of you who struggle to implement this in that way, then let me know and I'll consider it for a future episode. You'll also find a link to this code in the description below, so please feel free to take a copy of that and to try this out for yourself. and it might give you a little bit of a head start in terms of implementing this into your own expert advisors. Okay, the next episode will also be a coding tutorial, but this time it will be to do with the code I used for the Tenkan-sen Kijun-sen crossover. And as I've said before, it's slightly more complex when using it for these two indicator lines than it is when using a crossover, for example, of a moving average. And there's just a little bit more that you need to take into account in order to make sure that your code is operating effectively. If you're not already, then please do subscribe to the channel. And by making sure you also click on the notification bell, this will mean that you get notified whenever new episodes from Darwinex are released. But now until next time, trade safe.